This episode of the Managing Madrid podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you think you might be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, BetterHelp is here to help. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you, and you can talk to your therapist in a private online environment at your convenience. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network that gives you access to help that may not be available in your area. And all you have to do is just fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs, and then you get matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Then you schedule secure video and phone sessions, plus you can exchange unlimited messages, and everything you share is completely confidential. You can request a new therapist at no additional charge at any time. Join the 2 million plus people who have taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Special offer to Managing Madrid podcast listeners: get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/managingmadrid. That's betterhelp.com/managingmadrid. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring the Managing Madrid podcast. This episode is also brought to you by the Managing Madrid Podcast World Tour. We are coming to Las Vegas and San Francisco in July. So if you're headed to Vegas for the Clásico or to San Fran to watch Real Madrid's game versus Club America, please come and meet a bunch of other Madridistas as well at the Managing Madrid podcast. The links to book your spot to those shows are in the show notes. So go ahead and do that. Spots are filling up, and we want you to get in at the early bird price because prices go up July 1st, and do that ASAP and book your spot. Coming up is an Isco tribute podcast, and we're going to get started with Ray Hudson and Derek Ray. Let's go.
Nice article in the Managing Madrid blog. Wonderful lads that do a great job there, and worth reading about that man there. Karim Benzema needs the rest, and the numbers reveal why.
Times ended up almost looking like a 6-3-1. Some very good writing about that on the Managing Madrid website. First great podcast as well. Of course, Fede Valverde was a huge part of the equation.
Hello and welcome to the Managing Madrid podcast. We are recording this on Sunday night, and we are releasing the third iteration of our tribute series, which is basically in 3 installments. So the first one was Marcelo, which happened on the last match day of the season after Real Madrid played Real Betis. Matt and Om spoke about Marcelo's legacy at Real Madrid, and I'm sad I wasn't a part of that, but I'm sure you guys did it justice. And to be honest, I miss him already. I think we all do. It was nice actually to see him celebrate his son's goal. I don't know if you saw him, Matt, this weekend. That was a really nice, wholesome moment. And then, of course, Matt and I did a huge, massive Gareth Bale tribute podcast. So if you missed that, go and check it out. I was really proud of that one. And tonight, last but not least, Isco. And, you know, this one is weird. Like, if you go down these 3, in my opinion, legends, and really everything is relative. So there are great legends that are untouchable, then there's a tier below, there's different legends and whatnot. So in their own way, they're all regarded as a type of legend at Real Madrid. They all have different kinds of legacies, and none of them are really similar. Marcelo's is that he was just, one of the greatest left backs in football history and has a storied career. Bale's is complicated but brilliant, and a lot of great moments and some epic numbers, and a little bit of a complicated legacy because of the fans' relationship with him. And then Isco's is a different kind of legacy in that he didn't have the injuries that Bale did. He never really had there was never really a huge, massive disconnect between him and the fans. It was just that he was a brilliant, brilliant footballer who, at one point during his Real Madrid career, had the wrong coach for him, and after that, it just wasn't the same with him, and none of the coaches could really revive his career. Quite frankly, not many of the coaches, or if any of the coaches, really give him a chance to kind of showcase his skills. And when he played pretty decent, but he still didn't really work his way in, and now he just kind of leaves. And to me, Matt, I look at Isco and I think the weird thing about him is that if you put him in any other era, he could be a massive legend. Like if you put him in from 2003, from 2007, 4 pretty dark years for the club where nothing was working. They didn't really have a superstar to help. And they had past peak legends and Iker Casillas basically just saving a bunch of goals in a one-man team. If you had him in that era, he might have been bigger. He might have been a star you could rely on offensively. On the flip side, if we also, it's weird because you have him intertwined with Gareth Bale in a lot of ways, because they directly are connected to each other. Because if Gareth Bale wasn't the injury-prone player he was, we may have never seen the brilliant version of Isco either. So it's kind of a weird career. And so now we're here to break it down. And Matt, I guess maybe your initial thoughts on Isco's departure. You can take it back to, I think it must have been 4 weeks to a month ago now, where he officially confirmed it on his social media, the open secret that he was leaving the club. How did you feel?
So I think this has been a long time coming, honestly. I think Isco probably should have left maybe a year or two ago, if not even before that. And it's hard not to feel like Isco didn't get the most out of his talent, because I do think he was one of the most talented players in this squad. And you mentioned that 2003 to kind of 2008 type of era. I think he, without a doubt, would have been the most talented player in those squads. And even in this squad, even with the squad with Cristiano as part of it, I think he showed, specifically in that 2017 season, that latter half of that 2017 season, that he was capable of playing at an elite level. I remember Sid Lowe saying that he was the best player in Spain, even better than Messi during that time period. And it was not an exaggeration to say that. He was that good. And it was only a brief, I would say, 3-4 months where he actually pulled that off. But that was the Isco that everyone kind of expected when we first signed him. Like, that was the potential we all saw from his Malaga days, where he led that team into the semifinals. Was it semifinals or quarterfinals of the Champions League, where they just missed out, losing to Borussia Dortmund, but he was the leader of that team. And then he went on to have an incredible under-21 tournament with Spain. He was the next big thing, and we all expected him to be that Isco we saw in 2017. And for whatever reason, it may be a reason. It may come down to attitude, and that's kind of what Solari hinted at and what Ancelotti hinted at in his final press conference. It may have come down to attitude with Isco, where he just he didn't have the work ethic required to make the most of that talent. And I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if that's a fair characterization. I don't know if I'm drawing kind of conclusions that aren't entirely warranted, but that's kind of just where I come away with it. Like, I feel like Isco had so much skill, like the technical ability that was unparalleled. Like, I think his technical ability was equal to Luka Modric. And I just don't think he made the most of that. And I know that may be sounding harsh, but I think it may be true.
Yeah, the talent is undeniable. But also, we know that talent only means so much in world football. A lot of people have talent. A lot of people don't become as great as the people who are less talented than them. So it's important to have, but it's not the ultimate deciding factor of how great your career will be. But Isco was, and when we talk about attitude and character, it's still not really clear what that means. When no one really has the answer of like what he did wrong, because it's clear that he didn't really do anything that wrong that was like that we could tangibly look at and say, well, he did this is why. Like, there was managers who had problems with him. Someone who works inside the club told me once that he has a massive ego and is someone who's kind of just walks around and feels like he's above others. That's what someone on the inside told me. We know that his problems of attitude and character and the perception of him kind of started way back with Unai Emery in Valencia, who benched him, didn't really see value in him, told him that he doesn't really bring balance to the team, doesn't work hard enough, doesn't take it seriously enough. And then we didn't really hear that side of his side of him, like, at all. Like, until Solari came, and Solari took issue, and after that, it was unrecoverable. I thought we could flip through his resume really quick before we get too deep into this. 5 Champions League titles, 4 Club World Cup titles, 3 European Super Cup titles, 3 La Liga titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles. 3 Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup titles, 1 Copa del Rey title, 3 Spanish Super Cup tit from an analytical perspective, first in goals per shot, 2016-2017. Second in goals per shot on target, 2016-2017. Fourth in passes into the penalty area, 2017-2018. Second in progressive carries, 2017-2018. Fifth in progressive carrying distance, 2017-2018. And fourth in shot creating actions per 90, 2017-2018. So I just thought we'd run through that really quick because I think his peak, while we can say the peak of his peak is 2016-2017, I would say it's a 2-year range really. 2016 to 2018 is where he was at his best. And funny enough that those weren't his highest playing time days. The most he's ever played was 2014-2015, which is an interesting part of his career to look at as well, because that's the year where Ancelotti did the 4-man midfield thing, which was a joy to watch before it got burnt out. So there's also that season, but it's not as efficient as 16-17, which I think is the peak of the peak. So that's where we stand on it. So it's kind of weird again, and now we're talking about Carlo, and obviously Carlo had a chance to coach him twice. Zidane had the chance to coach him twice. Are you surprised that maybe like when Solari left and Zidane came back that Isco didn't grow back into the team? Or do you think that that was a telling sign that Zidane never was able to resuscitate him?
I think it's a really telling sign that both Zidane and Ancelotti haven't implemented him more in their second 10 years. Because, like you said, in that 4-man midfield season, like Isco, I think, had the most minutes of any midfielder, of any outfield player, actually. Even though he'd kind of be in and out of the squad, he managed to take advantage of injuries and then force a role where he had the most minutes that season. So it's clear Ancelotti really liked him during his first 10 years. Zidane obviously really liked him the first 10 years. And so for things to flip so dramatically is surprising. And yes, we know players change and evolve. And Mourinho once had that quote, I think he was talking about Gareth Bale, where he said, players aren't the same players. 7 years have gone by. Like, players aren't the same players as they were 7 years ago. And with Isco, though, I think the expectation was he signed when he was 21. So if 7 years go by, he's 28, 29, like he is now. You expect him to be at the peak of his powers. We expected the world of him. Like, the projections that were made of Isco were that he was going to be Spain's best player. He was potentially even a world beater, like world class, Ballon d'Or type player. He won the Golden Ball or the Golden Boy award at Malaga. And so this was a guy who had everything in front of him. And ultimately, like, I think it's telling that both Ancelotti and Zidane really didn't use him in his second tenure.
It's just weird to me because with Bale, I feel like it was more gradual. Like, it was just kind of like over the course of like the 7 years, it was just kind of just gradually steeping down because of injuries and taking a toll, and him just also losing interest. It was more gradual. It was like boiling a frog. And with Isco, I think it just feel like it was overnight. Lopetegui got sacked, and Isco's career got sacked with it. Like, that's what it seemed like. Because after that, it was done. Once Solari came in, it was completely done. And again, it's weird to me because we've all said on this podcast so many times that none of us really thought he was that bad during his cameos to just outcast. And, his in a way, you could argue there's the whole thing, like the death of the 10. I think Isco at least could have played on the left wing a little bit, could have played in the central midfield a little bit. He wasn't just a 10. So just to look at his career at the spearhead of the diamond and coinciding with his peak, just because he thrived in that doesn't mean that that was the only position he could play. And so it was quite interesting to see what happened to him. So the other thing I wanted to say about Isco is that, and again, this goes directly with Carlo Ancelotti, is that I think his career was so tied to Gareth Bale and whether Bale was healthy or not. And that's what's kind of interesting about it, because 14-15, surprise, surprise, Bale was injured a lot, and Ancelotti deviated from the 4-3-3 because of that. Same thing happened in 16 and 17 with under Zidane. Bale was injured a lot, so Isco came in. And by the time the final came around in Cardiff, I think it was that year, 16-17 was Cardiff or Kiev? I can't remember. Cardiff. Yeah, Juve, Cardiff. So Bale was healthy for the final, but then there was just no way you could come in and, like, after all that Isco had been done in the run-up to that, to start Bale would have been crazy. So Bale came in off the bench. And I think what's interesting about it is that Ancelotti himself said that Isco can be the next Zidane. Like, Isco could have been... He said this back in 2014, I think it was, that Isco could be in the future what Zidane was. And he said the only thing that's limiting him from achieving that is the fact that he plays a certain role, and in this club we have Ronaldo, Bale, and Benzema, and we have to start those three, which means we have to go three up front. In another universe, Isco can play as a second striker, which we saw plenty of times with Lopetegui in Spain as well. And one of my favorite Isco games of all time, possibly my most favorite, is not a Real Madrid game, it's a Spain-Italy game, this 6-1. Was it Argentina or Italy? So it was Italy, because it was the Verratti running
Italy,
circles around him and stuff, and he scores a hat-trick and stuff. So that, in that role, it was like kind of him and Asensio kind of going back and forth, interchanging as the false nine. It was very incredible dynamic to watch. Very interesting. So Ancelotti himself had said that Isco could be that guy, but we have Bale, Ronaldo, and Benzema, so we can't do that. But Isco got to play that role so many times because Bale was injured. And if Bale wasn't injured, again, I'd be very curious to know how we even look at Isco. Would we even hold him that high? Probably not. If I had to guess, I think he becomes a much less relevant player than what we know today. But because of Bale's injury, someone had to step up, and it was him, and he was brilliant. I think, Matt, it's also interesting to go back to 2017, 2018, because long before we signed Hazard, there was a good chance we were going to sign him 2 years before we actually signed him. And I remember at that time thinking, because we still had Ronaldo at the time, it makes no sense. Like, the way Isco was playing and the way Asensio was playing then, how are we going to fit this guy in? Like, I don't want to bench either Isco or Asensio. And I really thought those two would be like the future, real, like, legitimate pillars of our team for like the next 5-6 years or whatever. And that just didn't happen. But that's how good Isco was. So maybe we can start, if you want to start chronologically, we can. Do you want to take it all the way back to Isco's first season?
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, we could even take it back. Like, I've talked about what I expected of him, but what were your thoughts? Like, when we signed Isco summer of 2013, he's coming off all those performances for Malaga. He's coming off an amazing under-21 tournament where he was named the player, or him and Thiago were named the players of the tournament, and he was just the hottest property. It was between us and Manchester City, and he ultimately chose us. Like, what was your thinking at the time and your kind of expectations for him and his overall signing?
So at that time, I remember watching him with Malaga the season prior, and that was a deep Champions League run, right? And I remember watching him and thinking, this guy is going to be something really special. And I wasn't entirely sure where he was going to fit at the time when we signed him, because 2013, 2014, we still had some very interesting playmakers, and obviously Ozil was still around. So Ozil had left, I think, just maybe before the transfer window or something like that. I have to look at it again. But I wasn't entirely sure if he was going to be a starter or be like a bench player. I kind of actually even looked at him as kind of a Guti type player for the next few years. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I was really excited about his signing. And one of the interesting things when we first signed him, so just to get it clear now, so he obviously arrives with Bale in the same summer. And he is two of the more exciting signings that season. Ozil leaves around the start of the season, so it wasn't like kind of clear cut. You know, there wasn't like that smooth of a transition because he lingered a little bit and ultimately was kind of pushed out. Callejon left, Kaká left that year, and Higuaín also left. And so in comes Bale and Isco basically for Ozil, Higuain, Callejon, like these guys. Kaká, his tenure is over at that point. So it's a really, really promising signing at that time. And I remember one of the things that struck me most was that the first couple games, he actually scored a couple headers. I don't know if you remember this going all the way back. And it was like, whoa, I didn't know he could do that. So it was like, and it was around the beginning of that season, Real Madrid weren't playing that well. And Isco actually stepped up and was a savior in a couple of those games. And I thought that started to really set the tone. And, you know, I thought he kind of gradually worked his way in. And it's interesting looking back now, one of the big frustrations that fans had at that time, and I remember specifically sitting my very first ever game as a journalist, press row, was against Malaga in 2015 at home, and Isco got booed that day, and he was kind of dabbling on the ball a little bit too much, and he was running into players. He wasn't releasing the pass quickly enough, and I remember thinking, because I remember heading into that game, like, how come Isco's not playing more at that time? And you get reminded, like, oh, there's things like this, there's kinks to his game that he has to get rid of. And I think if you fast forward his career, I thought he did a really good job of getting that out of his system and actually playing the right pass, playing the pass quick enough and not dabbling on the ball too long. And I thought by the end of it, this whole myth of he slows the game down became just that, a myth. I thought he was really good at advancing and progressing the ball. I thought it was really important. So I do remember that there were frustrations with him when we first signed him, but there was also excitement, and it kind of went hand in hand with the Bernabeu crowd and how they felt about him. But ultimately, I think, especially by 2017, 2018, he was a huge favorite, not least because he was unbelievable, but also because he was Spanish. He was close to home, and I think fans resonated with that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I almost felt like I was like a little kid with how excited I was with Isco signing, because I watched that full under 21 Euro, and that Spain team was incredible. It had Morata, it had Nacho, Carvajal, Iñigo Martinez, Alberto Moreno, Iaramendi, who we also signed that summer because he played really well in that tournament. Thiago, I think Sarabia, like so many names in that team. Not Mata, but Isco was like, he was a part of that, and I just remember watching him every single game. I was blown away by his technical ability, and so I was so excited for his signing. Just thought it would ultimately be, yes, we were losing Ozil, and that was a tough pill to swallow for most fans, because I think everyone, although Ozil could be inconsistent, like he usually showed up in the big games. But it felt like it was an easier pill to swallow, knowing that you had a 21-year-old Isco, a guy who could go on to be a great, and like you said, was Spanish. Like, it was nice to have the best young Spanish player in our team. And scoring that header against Real Betis on his debut, like, that kind of set the tone. And I think I thought overall, like, that year he played really well in that first year under Carlo. He kind of had to, at times, come in off the left or play central midfield. And him and Marcelo, as many recall, like, they were the game changers in La Decima in the final, coming on as substitutes late in the second half to just transform that game and give us the edge. And for me, Isco, what I always loved about Isco was he's a street footballer. Like, you watch him and he does things that nobody else can do and pulls things off that nobody else can. And I remember seeing him live a couple times, and each time Isco was probably the player that, seeing them live, like, makes you appreciate them even more. And for me, he was probably one of the players that surprised me the most with just how good he was technically. I remember I went to see, I guess it was our game against Roma in New York when Lopetegui was the coach. It was a preseason game. And I remember Isco picks up the ball. He's got like 3 men around him, and he's just outside our box, our own box. And he's so calm, so composed. Like, the ball looks glued to his foot. he evades the press and just gets us out of trouble. And I was just like, my God, this guy is he's so technically superior to everyone else. And he's always had that in his locker. And I think my fondest memories of Isco will be just his overall press resistancy. And like when that diamond was at its peak with Cruz, Marcelo, Isco, Ronaldo all combining down the left, like that was unplayable and so fun to watch.
Oh, like sometimes when like Mendy's doing a roulette in our box in present day, and we were just not able to escape our half. I close my eyes and I just think about Cruz and Isco and Marcelo and Benzema all at their peak and Ronaldo. Yeah, I mean they would just laugh at presses. They would laugh and they would invite and they would just destroy them and obliterate them. And Isco was a huge part of that. I think a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned about Isco, I remember really fondly too. The touches, the amount of like, we have infinite GIFs now. Like if you type Isco on Twitter GIFs, there are so many different sequences that come up that were just breathtaking. The touches, the turns, the roulettes, the magic, and obviously he was called La Magia. So the fact that, you know, he had that to him, like it was a well-earned nickname. It was a well-earned moniker. He really made football look beautiful and made it look like an art. And it's interesting because one of the things, around that same time as that Spain-Italy game, he actually wasn't playing that regularly for Real Madrid at that time. He was playing, but he wasn't starting every game like he was in 16-17. And one of the things he said is that he needed continuity. And I really think, and this is all in kind of hindsight now. I think about it more now than I did at the time, because at the time, when Solari came, I remember writing a huge Isco article for StatsBomb, kind of explaining the situation, what's going wrong, and the attitude and stuff like that. And Isco's analytics and numbers, his ball progression and stuff like that have always been great, elite, among the best in Europe when he's playing. And I just think like at the time my assessment was, look, if Zidane comes back and puts Isco back in the team, then we'll know that Solari maybe was out of his mind. And if he doesn't, then maybe Solari had a leg to stand on. And it turns out like every coach since then has basically not trusted Isco as much. And I go back to the point about continuity. I think like in another universe, if Zidane never left, I mean, to be quite fair, Lopetegui would have been, Lopetegui and Isco were basically just, they went hand in hand together. And I also think in an alternate universe, really the worst thing that happened to everyone in this situation was Real Madrid signing Lopetegui. And which means he had to leave right before the World Cup, which means Fernando coached Spain, which means Isco, who was so integral to Spain and actually still was with Lopetegui gone, all of a sudden that Spain team was directionless and aimless and went into that World Cup without really knowing what the hell they're doing. And so that was a disaster. And also Lopetegui was sacked anyway within a few weeks of signing for Real Madrid. So when Solari came, Isco lost basically in every scenario. Really what the domino effects of Zidane walking away in 2018 was huge in derailing the career of Isco. And I often think about like what happens if Solari just never comes in. What happens? Because it's crazy that a player just loses his playing time after that and can't recover with any coach. It's really, really crazy. And I think if I go back to continuity, because I think if we had continuity since 2018, right now we'd be talking about a player who's probably indispensable. That's my personal opinion. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe he would have declined. Maybe it was inevitable. But certainly I don't think if that was going to happen, it would have been to this extreme. And I don't think it would have been like what we're seeing right now. At worst, I think it would have been like, oh, he's like a player who's sought after among a bunch of top clubs, and he's still a really good player, and a player who's still playing regularly with Real Madrid. That's how I feel about this. And I think one man, Solari, came in, and whether he had as good reasons or not, it was a massive, massive shift in Isco's career.
Well, I think there's a couple things that that are now coming back to me too. So one, that's the start of Zidane's second tenure.
Yeah.
Isco actually was important. Like, think back to the Manchester City game. He was probably our best player the first leg before COVID.
He was playing some of the big games, but not regularly.
Yeah, he was playing some of the big games, and I think the part of the reason why he wasn't playing regularly was because he was getting injured more frequently. And I think, was it under Solari when he had his tonsils taken out and was out for a number of months? I think they got infected or something, and then he was out for a number of months. Like, I remember specifically many feeling like after he got his tonsils removed, it kind of really slowed him down because he couldn't get back to full fitness and he just wasn't himself for a while. And so I think that also kind of threw him for a curve and didn't help get things started well with Solari, or maybe it was even Zidane. I can't remember when that injury
I think the tonsils thing was 2021.
2021.
So that would have been Zidane.
Wow, that was more recently.
Yeah.
Okay. But even, I mean, think back to some of his, like even this year against Levante, he was the best player on the pitch. And he came into preseason really fit, like apparently worked really hard. And he replaced Cruz in that match against Levante and was our best player, and then didn't see the light of day again. And so, to Isco's point that he needs continuity, I think that is kind of fair. And I think whether it be injuries or other issues, like he really, I think wherever he ends up, and it's weird that we haven't heard anything. It's almost July 1 and we don't really know what's going to happen with Isco. But I think wherever he ends up, if he ends up at a club like a Sevilla, let's say, and he has a manager that is going to play him and give him that continuity, I think Isco will turn out to be the Isco we knew and we saw, at least in like close to the player we saw in 2017, 2018. I don't think that's outlandish to say, because I still think he's young. I still think, and Isco's game's never really been about athleticism. I would say his first 2 years under Carlo, he did a lot of running and he worked really hard. But further on, especially in the Diamond, like his game, he pressed really well. But in terms of like running up and down the field and just needing to be super athletic, that's not ever going to be a huge part of Isco's game. So you wouldn't think he would decline that rapidly. And if you can find the right system for him and the right position, I wouldn't be surprised if if he's starting for Sevilla week in and week out, I wouldn't be surprised if he's like one of the best players in La Liga again.
Certainly that's the level of club it's going to be now. It's not going to be anyone bigger than that. I saw Roma as an interesting option, which, Mourinho still plays with the 10. He plays with the 4-2-3-1, so it could work for him. Pellegrini's there. He could play the Mkhitaryan role, one of those two. But going back to some of the things you were saying, I think also with Isco, I don't know. I think I still go back to the Solari thing and think like that was the turning point. That was the massive turning point for him. And what happened after that was really he just couldn't work his way into the team. But it is an interesting point that you bring up, that Zidane, first of all, he did bring Isco and Marcelo back, I think, on his first game back. And you think Isco even scored that game. But that was more of a test run to see what he has, because the league was over at that point. And he wanted to just basically have a little tryout there. And yeah, he was playing. He played that game just before the pandemic. It was against Manchester City. And then there was Barcelona after that, and then everything shut down. So I think, I still think maybe something deeper happened, if you ask me. Because for whatever reason, while I thought his role against Manchester City worked in that first leg, he didn't play in the second leg when everyone came back from football. And you looked at what happened in that game, and his skills were actually sorely needed, and he played well in the first leg. And I don't even think Isco featured at all in that game. And we had severe lack of transition and fluidity between the defensive line and the attack that game. Hazard was a no-show, and Militao and Varane needed help progressing the ball. And Isco just didn't play all of a sudden, despite playing in the first leg and playing really well. So I'm not sure what happened there either. So again, I'm fascinated if the Isco book that comes out one day. And I hope we hear from multiple voices and not just one side of the story, because I just want to hear exactly what happened. Because, again, none of his performances were bad enough for him to be outcasted. So it goes to a deeper problem, if you ask me. What memories will you remember when you think of Isco? When you tell your kids and grandkids about Isco, what are you going to tell them?
I think of one of the first memories that pops up is that goal. It wasn't his goal. I think Benzema actually scored it, but the goal against Barcelona in the Santiago Bernabeu, it was the 2014-2015 season where Contrao plays it down the line, I think it was, and Isco kind of like passes it around Iniesta, runs around Iniesta, picks up the ball, continues that counterattack, feeds it, and he was just integral to that play. And I think that one sticks out in my mind. I think some of the like roulettes and some of the skills and the different moments he had, like think about how many times when he takes the ball out of the air, like it'll be like a punt or like a massive kick across field, and he stretches his whole leg, gets his toe up, and just perfectly brings the ball down right into his path, and like sometimes even like turns while he does it. And those types of moments were insane, and again speaks to the technical quality he has and the level he really possessed. And I think like honestly, I probably won't remember the last few years because they weren't great. But I think back to the Champions League nights, the night against Atletico Madrid, he scored after Benzema's play down the line. That's famous. He's the one that chipped the actual goal in. And he was crucial in those Champions League games and helping us retain possession, break through pressure. When the diamond was really at its best for that half season before it got scouted. Like he was so fun to watch, and it just felt like that midfield was invincible. Like the four of them in there, it was just the perfect mix. And when I think of peak Isco, I think of him with that like a little bit shaggy, long hair before the ponytail or anything like that, and just dicing people up. Obviously, the Sporting Gijón game was probably arguably his best ever game for Real Madrid. And he just went on a run during that whole spring season where he was incredible. And that was so fun. Like, it was so fun to enjoy him and watch him. And the sad thing is, it was so fleeting. It was so short. I wish we could have seen more of it. Like, cause that's really the sad thing is like, man, that Isco was so fun to watch. And if we could have had more of it, it would have just been such a blessing.
So I also thought it would be interested to like just talk about his player profile a little bit more. And you and I actually spoke about Isco during our Bale podcast because, again, they're interconnected. And one of the things we had mentioned was the fact that Bale did bring us better balance in a lot of games. And I think they counter to like what I'm saying about, if he had continuity since 2018, that's naively also assuming that it would have just been smooth sailing the whole time, because let's not pretend there wasn't some tactical flaws in 2018 with Isco there. And namely, it was that opponents had scattered out the diamond to its core, it had defensive deficiencies, and also that entire Champions League run 2018, Real just started to do their damage when Zidane did the sub where he took Isco off and brought on wingers. And it happened every knockout game, basically up until the final. I wrote a huge Isco profile right after the Clásico, I lumped it into one with the Clásico defeat. And this was a huge, huge thing. So I can't assume that it would have been a smooth sailing diamond formation for like 6, 7, 8 years, right? That's not realistic. So it would have been a variation of the diamond, or it would have been him playing on the left or playing in the central midfield, which again, like, to be fair, he's not better than Kroos. He's a different player than Kroos. And he's not a winger. So if you want to play a 4-3-3, you can't play with him really. And that is the truth. That is the truth. You can put him as a left winger, and basically I think that's the problem that Hazard has now. Like, he's not as good as Vinicius, and he's not as quick as Vinicius, and he doesn't bring as much two-way balance as Vinicius, and if he plays the 10, that role doesn't exist. It's the same kind of conundrum. So there's that. That's to be fair. Like, I think football changed a little bit and Isco can play in a certain scheme, and he can only play in a certain scheme, and that's, I think, a fair statement to say. So I think that's part of it. So I don't want to naively assume that just because he would have, if he had continuity since then, he would have been unstoppable or whatever. We think it's fair to point out both sides of it. And I remember we had talked about so many different ways that Real Madrid could play up until that 2018 Champions League final versus Liverpool, and everything we wrote, everything we recorded, everything pointed to the fact that Bale needs to start that game over Isco, and I think that was proven correct as well. So there is also that. But I did want to say, I think the fact that on the field anyway, from what we could analyze, I took a lot of issues with the way that fans perceived Isco's playing style. They labeled him as a lazy player, which I never saw. Like, I remember during that PSG first leg, where that's the game where Zidane takes off Isco, brings on Bale, Vasquez, Asensio, and whoever else he takes off at that moment. And Emery makes some bad subs on the flip side, and we win that game with subs off the bench. And that game, a lot of people were saying, well, Isco was liability, he was lazy, he didn't work hard. And I went back and wrote a huge column after that game and looking at the film and the data, and Isco was pressing like a maniac. He was winning the ball all over the pitch. So I never agree with the fact that he was lazy. I can say maybe that there was tactical issues surrounding him, or that, maybe there are certain sequences where he puts the team in a pickle, but I never agreed that he was lazy. And also the fact that people would say he's slow on the ball. I never really understood what they meant by that, because if you look at when the ball is at his feet, he's not dribbling around aimlessly. He was always looking at the path to escape pressure and get the ball up to the final third. And I never really agreed with those two takes. I thought they were a little bit lazy in themselves. That I think people Ohm was talking about this too, that people look at the playing style of a player and come up with a lot of assumptions and conclusions about how they are and how they play. And sometimes players maybe look slow, but they're not actually slow. And so I'm curious to know what you think of him, like some of the myths about him, some of the way that people attributed, like some of the criticisms that were drawn towards him.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like effort and defensive work he put in, like he was never, he always put it, especially under Ancelotti. I felt like the amount of miles he put into games, and I think Ancelotti once said that Isco could be like a Clarence Seedorf for him, because he started to turn into more of a true midfielder. And that's what he did in that role. Like, he worked his ass off in that formation. And I think that sometimes goes under the radar, and Isco doesn't get credit for it. But the other thing with kind of the continuity comment, going back to that, is he did get continuity. Like that 2017-2018 season, he was starting nearly every single game. And that's when it was one of our worst first halves. Like, it's actually pretty incredible that we won the Champions League that year, because the start of that year we were awful. We lost to Tottenham, we lost to Girona, we lost to Athletic Bilbao. We were just losing games left and right. I think Benzema and Ronaldo had less than 10 goals between them by January. Like, Benzema had 4 goals or something. And the diamond just wasn't working. We wrote about it ad nauseum about how it was scouted. Isco's position was leaving us unstructured, and so nobody knew where Isco would be in transition, and so teams were just slicing through that. And so I would argue that Isco did get the continuity during that period, and it didn't work. The team just wasn't playing well, and they kind of got it into gear. I think the talent and they got enough of it in the Champions League. And like you mentioned, against PSG, we had to sub Isco off and put Asensio and Lucas Vasquez on. So sometimes even then it still didn't work. It wasn't until we changed the system that it began to work. And I don't know, like I just feel like with Isco, it was always what could have been. Because even his Spain career, like it wasn't just Real Madrid. His Spain career, you felt like could have been so much more. He only had 38 caps. He only has 38 caps for Spain, and he debuted when he was 20 years old. So, I mean, he should be a guy that's in the like 70s, 80s caps range right now if he had the career that many projected him to have. And he was left out of what was it, the 2014 World Cup, that he was completely omitted from the squad, and the 2018 World Cup, which was supposed to be, like you said, him and Lopetegui leading that charge. He was one of Spain's best players, but Spain weren't good, and it just didn't work. And yes, you can blame the whole debacle, but at the end of the day, like Isco wasn't really a part of the next phase in the next generation, and he's at the age where he should definitely still be there and definitely be a key component to the Spain team. So it hasn't just been Real Madrid, and that's the thing. It's been so inconsistent with Isco, and I don't know. Do you like? How do you like? Would you compare his? How do you compare his career to Guti? Because I know that's kind of the parallel that a lot of people make. And how would you like? Do you see that parallel? Because even Guti didn't have this Spain career that many thought he should have had.
Yeah, I mean, Guti just didn't have a career in Spain at all, like full stop. He just didn't have one.
Yeah.
The Guti and Isco comparison is super interesting, and it's one that comes up often. And we actually see it on this podcast a lot. We see it on social media a lot. And we've talked about it. I think there's various different opinions about that. A lot of people, Lucas himself feels that Guti was has the bigger Real Madrid legacy, at least. I think, I don't know. I don't think Guti had any season necessarily that he was as good as Isco it was in 16-17. Although Guti in 2000-2001 season, where he had to play striker and scored 14 goals, and we were like, what the hell, this guy can do this, was really one of the biggest flexes I've ever seen in a Real Madrid career ever. The fact that you can just put a guy like that who could play defensive midfielder, could play central midfielder, could play attacking midfielder, and then you just put him as a striker and he just scores 14 goals, that's insane to me. So that was pretty remarkable. But Guti, the only season that Guti had where he was truly, truly used, like there was the Capello season. And I think that the last season, or the second last season that Real Madrid before he departed, 2007-2008, there was only two. Yeah, Schuster. So there was only 2 seasons in his Real Madrid career where he actually broke 2,000 minutes, and that was 05-06, and the other one was 07-08. Whereas Isco, kind of the same, actually. Oh my God, I'm just re-looking at this now. Isco only had
You're only looking at La Liga, though, right?
Only looking.
Because Isco definitely exceeded 2,000 minutes in all competitions.
Yeah, that's true. So,
and same with Guti, I'm sure.
So, I kind of have them in the same range. I feel like this is the way I would answer the question, even though I don't even think you asked me to answer Guti versus Isco, but this is where it's headed. If I had to pick one player who I had to build a long-term team around for like 10 years, I'd choose Guti probably. If I had his peak for one season, I think I'd take Isco 16-17.
So for me, I think Guti edges it for me. I don't know if that's just I don't know if that's just my like nostalgia and my just watching Guti in those final years. I love, like, I just think he was pure magic. But if I were to pick like one year of their peak, that's a good question. That's where it gets harder. And I don't know. Man, that's tough. I think maybe if I think to Guti's best ever performance that I've seen, it was probably that Sevilla game. That second half, it wasn't even a full half. It was the second half that we watched on the historical pod, where he completely turned the game around. We won 3-2. Versus
Guti.
Isco's probably, Guti.
Yeah.
And Isco's best ever performance was probably Sporting Gijon, or even that game for Spain versus Italy. And if I had to compare the two, that is so hard. I don't know. I think maybe Isco edges it.
Well, it's funny because we're saying Isco at his peak, but then what if you bring Guti's peak into the equation? It's like if you had one play you needed to execute, like one split second, you could argue like Guti over anyone in the history of football. If you just needed 1 second of something like that was not from this planet, Guti could pull it off. But then you just never knew with him if he was going to show up or not. That's the thing with him. But I actually, talking about Guti, I think is actually kind of apt because both Isco and Guti were never really part of the paper Once de Gala, the one that's on paper, like the one like when you draw it up at the beginning of the season. Those two names, with exception with like a year or two here and there, were never the ones who were first on the team sheet. They were looked at these really, really good players who are going to be important contributors to the squad, and both brilliant, and both important. And I think they almost kind of can be compared to each other in the sense that they're both similarly positioned, where they could be versatile in a couple different positions. They could play the 10 role. They're both geniuses on their day, could have brilliant moments, brilliant touches, brilliant passes, brilliant playmakers, and both Spanish, stay at the club for a decent amount of time. Guti, I think, edges it from a legacy standpoint because he was around for much longer. Plus, he's from the youth products, and he was incredibly versatile. The fans loved him. More so in retrospect, I think, if you go back in time and go to any given sequence in the Bernabeu, they're probably yelling at him and swearing at him. But there was a certain Madridismo with Guti that it's hard to match. Just his passion and celebrating goals that were his or not his. Part of the comebacks, he had that kind of Roberto Carlos leadership to him, and that the battle cry and all that stuff. And just speaking about it makes me miss it. But I actually think, if we're talking about, and I think this is where this conversation is going, what's Isco's legacy in terms of what range is he in all time? Is he...
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one thing that I think if Isco were listening to this podcast, and one thing he might disagree with on that Once de Gala point is he started 2 Champions League finals. So
because of
over
injury.
Gareth Bale. Well, Gareth Bale was fit for both those games.
Yeah, but
the Cardiff and the Key.
Yeah, but it was a matter of he wasn't match fit. Like, he didn't have the string of games that Isco had, I think, for him to start off in a one-off game like this. And I think he had eventually became more dispensable. And when we talk about attitude and stuff, I'm sure Zidane had his quarrels with Bale too, right? So. But yeah, I understand your point. That's why I said there were 1 or 2 exceptions.
Yeah. In terms of his legacy, well, here's a question. Do you think his legacy? I mean, I don't think his legacy is going to be as big as Bale's. And I
have Bale higher all the time.
Yeah, I think definitely. Bale's legacy is higher, and I don't know where Isco sits. Like, he's not. I don't know. Like, is he top 40? Is that?
I think he's top 50.
Yeah.
Top 50 is the range for him.
Yeah.
And it really depends on how much you value peak versus longevity and all that stuff,
Yeah.
Like,
so let me ask you this: if you're Isco, or even we zoom out and like we only see his signing in 2013. And what we expected of him, and then we get to the end, and we're at 2022. We see he's lasted this many years, 9 years at the club. He's won 5 Champions League trophies. He's won however many La Ligas you mentioned, however many Copa del Reys, and we're saying he's in the top 50 legacy of all time. Is that not just resounding success?
It is. It absolutely is. Do you know what it takes to be a top 50 Real Madrid player? It takes a lot, man.
Yeah.
It takes a lot. You know, like, and I'm going through this in my book. The amount of great players who don't even crack the top 75 list in my book. And some of them don't even crack top 100, but are still honorable mentions. I mean, this club is riddled with great players. I think top 50 is an incredible achievement. Yeah.
So I mean, Isco should be immensely proud of what he's done, and I think he probably is. I think the thing that we've been talking about, the theme of this podcast, is it just felt like he could have done more. But at the end of the day, you look back on your time at Real Madrid and what you achieved, and you tell young Isco that all the things he'll achieve at Real Madrid, he'll be blown away. Yeah.
Not only that, but also doing it in the era of Ronaldo and Cruz and Marcelo and Modric and Carvajal and Benzema, etc.
Yeah.
It was and he didn't look out of place with those players playing alongside him, and I think that's a huge testament. I also think fans, like, sometimes the things, I saw this crazy argument on my YouTube channel like a month or two ago where 2 fans were arguing amongst each other. And one fan was saying we shouldn't sign British players because Beckham was a failure. And someone else replied to him was like, Beckham was not a failure. And then
trying to trigger me?
I could see the trigger in your eyes. And the original poster's response was, yeah, he was a failure. He wasn't even a top 50 Real Madrid player of all time. Like, what? No, I think it was like top 20, he said, or top 30 or something. It was even more ridiculous of a standard. We have these standard for some reason for all these players, like not even realizing, like, how could that possibly be a failure if that's your barometer? Basically, everyone's gonna fail. And I think Isco was a wild success. I think Bale was a wild success, and I think Marcelo was a wild success. I think Marcelo will leave holding his head the highest, but and with Isco and Bale, there's a lot of what ifs and a lot of frustrations with how it panned out. But you know, no player is perfect. And even if you go back and look at, and to your point about like how we're going to remember him, we're going to remember all the good stuff. So if we just look at 2013 to 2022, the 9 years, we're going to remember it for the good stuff. And I think, like, if you go back and look at some of the players that we're comparing him to, and in my opinion, maybe some of the range of just, here's some random players. Like, we already talked about Guti. We basically only talk about the good of Guti these days. Like, the YouTube compilations, the genius passes, all that stuff. And I think the same is going to be with Isco. I think he's going to be remembered fondly. But, you know, one of my favorite Real Madrid players of all time, who only played a couple of years with the club, was Michael Laudrup. And I remember, I think it was who did the experiment where he went back and watched one of Laudrup's games, and it was like just this average game, right? And it's like, yeah, if you look back and watch like a random Modric game, it's probably average. Or like Guti or Isco, it's probably average. But, you know, we remember the fun stuff more now, and I think Isco will be remembered fondly, just like Bale will be. You know, Bale, I think it's funny. If you go and look at the LAFC signing now with Bale, and Real Madrid fans are laughing because he chose that place because of golf. And like literally his unveiling video, he was on a golf pitch.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The same people who were like, thought it was so insulting now are laughing about it. And so time heals wounds, man. Time heals wounds, and I think Isco will be remembered well.
Yeah, and I kind of I made this point on one of my Monday Musings articles, is that like, enjoy the present form of a player and like in their current state, because you never know what's going to happen. Like, we did not expect what happened to Bale to happen to Bale. We did not expect Isco to be 29 years old and to be arguably worse than he was at 21 years old. And so, like, just who knows how long Vinicius will be this explosive and this fun to watch. Like, enjoy it. Who knows how long Fede Valverde can burst his lungs and go up the field in like what feels like 5 milliseconds. Like, we just don't know how long. Yeah, we project that they'll get better, but we don't know that for sure. And so let's just enjoy the current state that they're in, because it was the same for Isco. Like, while we had it and while we had that brief period in the spring of 2017, like, that was so fun to watch.
Your preferred destination for him next season? Where do you want him to go?
Honestly, I think the Betis thing has been kind of ruled out, but I would actually think I'd actually prefer him at Betis than Sevilla. I think that would be more fun with Fekir, Canales. Obviously, he worked with Pellegrini while he was at Malaga. So I think they would be more fun to watch. Sevilla, I would like that. I would like that as well. And then the only other option, which we haven't really heard of anymore, it was more like in previous seasons or even this winter, was AC Milan, which it would be perfect for them. They play with the number 10. Brahim's not been playing well. Like, it could be a really good situation for him there. So those would be my three.
You didn't mention the Roma thing. Did you think that was a cool idea or no?
Oh, yeah, the Roma thing could work. Yeah, I think the Roma thing, it would be interesting to see Isco with Jose Mourinho.
The good thing about, I think Betis and Sevilla both he'd fit in various ways, but I think with the role I'd be most interested in probably is if he just started over Rakitic at Sevilla. I'd be really curious to see how that would look. That's the one I'd be most intrigued with, but I like Betis as well. At Betis, I assume he'd just probably start over Wanmi, right? On that left side, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. All right, Matt.
Which would be kind of harsh because he scored 14 goals.
Yeah, Wanmi's been great. So, either way, someone has to lose. But I mean, to be fair, why should it be Wanmi who loses out for a player who hasn't played in 2 years? So, there's also that. I suppose we should keep our expectations in check if we're just assuming that Isco of 2017 is going to show up for some club. We gotta be realistic. Any parting thoughts for Isco?
I think I always like to end it on a positive note, especially like you said, like his legacy will be remembered fondly, and I truly believe that. And I think Isco gave us so many just jaw-dropping moments and moments where you appreciate his technical quality. And at the end of the day, that's what football's all about. Forget everything else. You're there to be entertained and to watch and see something that you didn't think was possible. And Isco is the type of player that could do that. And so I'm happy that we got to witness that, and I'm happy for all the success he had. And that the fact that he chose to go to Real Madrid over Manchester City, I'm sure he's looking back and saying that was 100% the right move. And now I go down in history as part of the three-peat and actually have won in total 5 Champions League trophies. So I don't think he's regretting it for 1 minute.
He's had an incredible Real Madrid career. His peak, he was unplayable, a joy to watch, aesthetically breathtaking, and a lot of great memories with him. 2016, 2018, those 2 years, there was a lot to celebrate with him. And hope wherever he goes next season, it'll be fun. And I can promise you, I'm gonna watch him. May not promise I'm gonna watch Bale at LAFC, but I almost can promise that I'll watch Isco wherever he goes next season. Big fan of his. All right, Matt, thanks for kind of closing this tribute series with us, and maybe we'll have to do one next year on 1 or 2 legends. We'll see where it goes with Modric and when he retires, if ever. But this was fun. Thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Yep. Thanks, Kiyan.
All right, before we wrap it up, we wanted to give a shout out to our amazing patrons over on patreon.com/managingmadrid who do so much to support the show. Thank you for your support, and we really, really want to just say we love you from the bottom of our hearts. It's not possible to do this without you guys. And if you're listening to this and you're not a patron yet, well, please go over to patreon.com/managingmadrid, get a ton of exclusive content that's only up on Patreon, get a ton of value in return, plus you get to join a ever-growing family of incredible Madridistas who are incredibly knowledgeable about the game. So, also want to give a shout out to our $10 plus patrons specifically, because if you pledge $10 or more, you get a specific shout out on the podcast in addition to getting guaranteed responses to your questions. So shout out to Brandon Alvarez, Willie Reed, Wei Pering, Wamik Jamal, Umar Mahadi, Tyler Simon, Tyler Dixon, Tobias Arroyo Botcher, Tarek Goktas, Talib Salhab, Tahmid Kalam, Sushank Damala, Sujai Wani, Somanchu Singh, Shivam Tiwari, Sherry Sorial, Sheikh Hatiri, Shamil, Shabaz Sharapov, Sergio Arispe Santos Solorzano, Samir Z, Said Mahad, Say Mohan, Sasi Kumar, Rodrigo Balmaceda, Rishi D, Phoenix, Peter Powell, Paulo Fierro, Patrick Odaya Fadi, Oscar Barrera, Nico Laxo, Nicolas Zapatero Zubiare, Nicholas Moller, Nick Ribeiro, Nelson Mazariego, Muxith Thengal, MJ Diego, Mowgli, Michael Zinberg, Marin Myrtle, Martin Ridman, Logan Stahl, Leon Stavronakis, Kunal Tilakar, Crystal Glass, Kevin Rivera, Jose Cruz, John Fernandez, Jeff Thurston, Jason Fitz, Issam Arabi, Ian Marley, Graham Gerard, Gary Kohut, Frederick Antakiro, Frederick Sundros, Faisal Hamdan, S.A. Davisito, Eloy Enriquez, Edward Sossman, Daniel Williams, Christian Toft, Christian Acosta, Charles Williams, Brendan Powers, Brandon Stevens, Austin Fury Erdman, Ashik Bashar, Armin Gashi, Armando L, Anton Zrudenko, Anirudh Singh, Alexis Saniceros, Alex Rose, Al, Azaz Hussein, Adrian Rios, Adar Zalukovic, Adam Dorsey, Bella Chow, Varun, Ramtin Maghrur, Fabian Moreno, and Daniel Smith. Thank you guys for your support. We love you all, and Hala Madrid.